going off of what Mark said, I think a lot of the problem, there's so many people who feel libertarian. We just have to get them out, but they're so disenfranchised because most of the time they go to the ballot, it's either R or D. And it doesn't matter whether you vote for the R and D because the end result is more government, higher taxes, more spending, less freedom, less privacy, more deficit. Everything is worse. So this notion that Democrats are good on social issues and Republicans are real fiscal conservatives is nonsense. And that's why I love having libertarians on the ballot, because we're the only ones talking about shrinking government. To that point, what specific, can you name one piece of legislation that you would champion in the Congress or in the Senate that just most boldly shrinks government right away? What do you want to do? And Rob, you can start, but that's for all the candidates.
I think we could all probably name a dozen laws or 100 laws that we would like to see repealed. But let's just start with the low-hanging fruit. All of us agree that just the drug war has been a disaster. We see the movement on legalizing marijuana. Why can't we accept that this is going to happen? Republicans and Democrats should be able to see that this is going to happen. We should all be able to get on board with this. It's the right thing to do. Why not do that? That's a very simple issue. Tax reform and entitlement reform, all of those things we have to do, those are going to involve a lot of work. I think we can all understand that it's not just going to be, cutting and repealing. It's going to be a lot of legislative writing and all that. And the same with healthcare. So it's going to take a lot of work to do all that stuff. But there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and I think immigration is one where there's a lot of disagreement on what to do. But the basic fundamental fact is that a lot of the problems that we have are due to the fact we just don't allow enough people into the country as legal immigration, and that is what it causes a lot of the problems with people not liking the fact that they're illegal immigrants in the country. And that's something that we should actually all be able to agree on, I think. Surveillance is an issue where the reauthorization of the Patriot Act, reauthorization of FISA courts, those are things that my opponent, the incumbent senator, voted for. These are things that Jim Webb didn't vote for it, the civil libertarians and the Democratic Party didn't vote for it, but Mark Warner did. These are things that putting somebody, a libertarian, into the Senate or in Congress are going to make a difference on. There are a lot of other foreign policy. Let's talk about foreign aid. I think the most amazing fact about foreign aid is that almost double the amount of actual government foreign aid, double the amount that we spend on government-sponsored foreign aid, taxpayer-funded foreign aid. Double that amount is we provide to other countries voluntarily through organic remittances from immigrants who send money back to their families. This is voluntary. It is funding the people who we would want to fund, the people who are actually putting the money to use to better their families and who are actually going to fight for property rights and the rule of law. And this is something that a lot of people don't know about, that we provide, America not through our government, but America provides through these remittances almost double the foreign aid that our government is funding. And when the government does it, it usually goes to corrupt organizations that are basically, we're basically enriching the people who are in power, not the people who just want to live their lives. So, across the board, I think there's so many issues that if we just talk about, in a common sense fashion, just talk about simplifying the federal government, I think we can make a lot of progress and just make people aware of all of the ways in which the federal government is just out of control.
Jeff?
Agreed. One quick thing on Rob's last point, with the simplification piece. And Mark mentioned taxes earlier in his introduction. We've got, when it comes to our IRS code, tax code, we've got over 74,000 pages of IRS code today. That's our tax code. That's actually more than twice as many pages as the entire set of the Encyclopedia Britannica, which means that apparently we can tell the history of the world 2 times over before we can get through our tax code. To me, that seems a little nuts. Back to the original question. Specific pieces of legislation. I can't give you one, Chris, but I can give you a few. When it comes to the drug war, Controlled Substance Act of 1970. That is the most egregious piece of legislation that gives the federal government powers that it was never intended to have. When it comes to foreign policy, or foreign policy-ish, obviously the authorization of use of military force, which gives the president basically dictatorial powers to engage conflict throughout the world. You've got the NDAA, you've got the Patriot Act, that has nothing more to do with spying, I suppose, but it's all related. And then when it comes to spending, yeah, what I mentioned in the stump, Justin Amash's balanced budget amendment is actually a pretty good piece of legislation. It's very, very simple. It's basically one page, you know, and it just severely limits Congress's ability to continue spending our taxpayer dollars for whatever the heck they want. It's not a silver bullet, but it's a step in the right direction. So keep it short and sweet.
I have often said that politicians don't have to have a single original thought. They just have to choose wisely among the policy options that are already floating around out there. And to that end, I rely a lot on libertarian think tanks to come up with ideas and specific policy prescriptions. And certainly a good one is downsizinggovernment.org from the Cato Institute. And on there, they spell out specific cuts to discretionary federal spending that total at least $780 billion per year. And it may be more than that because I noticed that some of the numbers may be a few years old as to what the federal government or the spending is in those particular departments. But included in that is doing away with the Department of Education, doing away with the Federal Department of Energy, doing away with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, ending all corporate welfare, ending all farm subsidies. Now that doesn't take care of the entire problem, but in 30 seconds it's a pretty good start. And so I would say that I think there are plenty of good ideas out there. Downsizinggovernment.org has many very credible specifics that would non-trivially cut federal spending.
Well, I'll give you a kind of not an easy one, but an easy one and a more far-ranging one. The first would be, and this would be a piece of legislation that really just asks the federal government to follow its own law, which it rarely does. But one of the biggest problems in the Controlled Substance Act, as Jeff mentioned, is the classification of marijuana as a Schedule I. Basically, a Schedule I drug is supposed to be something with very little medicinal value and very high potential for physical addiction. That's not what marijuana is. Marijuana actually has almost no physical addiction and has very high potential for medical use, right? So the first piece of legislation, or the first thing that I would go after, would be to reschedule marijuana as not a Schedule I drug. First of all, I'd get rid of the entire Controlled Substance Act if I could. But the first thing that I would do would be to get marijuana out of there. And most of the states, if you look at it, have done that. I was a cannon fodder in the drug war back in when I was a much younger man with much more hair. I worked for the City of Atlanta Police Department, and I actually worked narcotics. And I can tell you what a fruitless endeavor that was. And at the time, I thought it was important, and now I think it was some of the least rewarding work I've ever done. One of the main reasons it was completely unrewarding was what we did a lot of, as you can imagine, street-level interdiction, as we called it, was we would go after users. That's a healthcare problem. And we would go after a lot of users of marijuana because it's low-hanging fruit. So the first thing that I would do would get the government to follow its own parameters of the 71 Controlled Substance Act and reclassify marijuana. You'd see a huge decrease in the prison industrial complex. There's tons of people out there who are incarcerated for nothing more than marijuana. Now, the more far-ranging